All right, so we're going to dive in for a second with reflection. Thank you for sharing that. That was very, very helpful. This is like the starting point when we think about growth and development. People say, I really want to grow. Like, I want to get better. And they go to a book. This is you starting this process of like, this is what it looks like to invest in your growth and development. You're starting this phase of, all right, let me first be aware of where are my gaps. What should I work on? Am I clear on this? What do I need to do? That's huge. Then move into the phase of like, how do I work on this? But it's a process. It doesn't have to happen all like that. It doesn't mean you find the book you read, all right, I'm good to go. Take your time doing it, but the slower you go to really set it up and then you get going, dude, I'm telling you, this process is awesome.
Awesome.
Like, I'm not talking about just my process. I'm talking about the process of growing is so much more fun and way more awesome than people believe it is if they just took the time to do it. So you taking the time to do it, man, I think you're going to see the value and the reward of it.
I'm excited, man.
Okay, so reflection. What I want to do is it's really this whole picture of self-awareness, but I want to show you this foundational habit, I believe, that is so helpful to continue to build upon as you're growing in self-awareness, timely decision making, learning on the fly, strategic agility, decision quality. Reflection is such a great tool to grow in that and to build upon. So I want to start there. I love how you've already been reflecting. And this is something even in conversations, I think anyone listening will be able to tell, like, man, this guy is way more aware. He's thinking about things that maybe they may not naturally think about. And so the how deep you go with certain topics, it tells me that you're thinking through these things a little bit more. Now I want to make sure, now that you're doing it, I want to make sure that the thinking you're having is healthy.
Cool.
And how do you make sure that you stay in that path? So this is actually from an article I read, and this was one of my favorite articles. I read this like 5 years ago, and it's been such a really cool tool of thinking about awareness. It separates it into internal self-awareness and then external self-awareness. So you can think about, being self-aware and then socially aware. And I wanted you to read this starting from the bottom corner. And the idea with this is not for you to put yourself in a category, but I want you to read it. So you're going to practice on your reading. But it's not to put you in a category, but it's to show you how in different seasons of life, you can probably find yourself all over the place in all of these. And to be aware of that alone is so helpful. And then we'll talk through it.
Okay.
So start from the bottom right and then work your way around. Or you can go, let's see, this way and then go there.
Okay. Seeker. They don't yet know who they are, what they stand for, or how their teams see them. As a result, they might feel stuck or frustrated with their performance and relationships. Pleaser. They can be so focused on appearing a certain way to others that they could be overlooking what matters to them. Over time, they tend to make choices that aren't in service of their own success and fulfillment. Introspector. They're clear on who they are, but don't challenge their own views or search for blind spots by getting feedback from others. This can harm their relationship and limit their success. Aware. It's green. Aware. They know who they are, what they want to accomplish, and seek out and value others' opinions. This is where leaders begin to fully realize the true benefits of self-awareness.
Okay, so you walk through that. I want to kind of hear, what are you connecting with the most right now?
Aware. It's hard to, I don't want to sound like I'm like a master of this, but I've been through a lot of like leadership development and learned a lot about like different topics and what things are the right things. And sometimes like as I'm reading through this too, like I'm attributing all the seekers I know to seeker, all the pleasers I know to pleasers, all the introspectors I know to the introspector, and all the people that are very aware to the aware. But yeah, I agree with it completely. I think too, for sure, different modules depending on different days, different situations. And I do think too, to that same, we've talked specifically about where I'm a pleaser and also some situations where I'm an introspector, and I definitely should have looked for different perspectives on things for sure. And I'm sure Seeker's in there as well.
The goal wasn't to make sure that you're in all of them. It's okay to say that you're aware. I'm curious on where do you find the times where you're most leaning towards a pleaser, and where do you find the times where you feel like you're most leaning towards being introspector?
Pleaser is my personal life. It's so weird. Like, I don't have different personalities when I'm doing business or when I'm doing life, but I definitely find myself trying to please people in my personal life. And I think introspector, probably in those situations where I know a lot about something, or situations where I have to move fast, you know. But I also think too, to some extent, like I tend to bulldoze certain people in my personal life too when it relates to my listening, right? Like I should listen because there may be a chance that I learn something else, or get new information, or am able to ask a better question. But I'm not really giving it an opportunity because I'm already locked. So the answer to your question is a bunch of different answers.
I'm hearing you though. And the main thing, and this is like the starting point, the main thing I wanted you to be able to see is the idea is we want to be in the aware category, but in our lives, we're going to probably lean towards other areas at different points. And so the idea isn't like, how do we be in aware 24/7? That's probably not the best question to ask. A better question to ask is, when we are slipping away from aware, do we recognize it? And how do we start moving back into it?
Is it always a bad thing too? You know, I think this is part of like even working through like some of the skills. Let's use like the introspector. Like, yeah, it's great to like have a team meeting. Like if I have to make a, let's say it's a budget decision, and like, yeah, it's great for everybody to feel included. But I know at the end of the day, I'm going to make a decision. I feel like I have all the information. Do I need everybody's opinion on it? You know, I think there are situations too where it's, and again, being very conscious of your own energy, your own time. Does it even matter if you're fully aware?
You know what I would say to that, and even just this perspective? I don't think it's bad to be in any one of those areas. I think it's bad to live there.
I like it.
So I have even a client that's in my head right now who is living in an area, and I'm like, by them living in this area, it's destroying them, and it's really impacting the people around them. But to be there, to say like, man, I've been here for a couple weeks or a couple days or whatever, that's not an issue, especially if you're aware of it. But, and I know people in different seasons, like they had to make a job change and they're just in a big seeker space. I don't really know what I want to do. Literally talked to someone this morning who is in that space. I don't know what I want to do in my life. I don't know to accept. That's not bad, but you don't want to just live there forever. You want to slowly start moving more towards the aware category.
I like it, man. It makes perfect sense. And now that you mentioned that about the seeker too, you can put me down for one of those. It's true, man. You know, and just looking, I think the thing that keeps coming to my mind too is like anybody I've worked for, I'm going to sacrifice my own happiness to make sure they're happy. So I think a lot of dynamics at play, but I can relate to what you're saying.
It's good, man. Okay. This one's going to be a little bit deeper, and excited just to talk about this. So I want you to start thinking about self-aware action. Now, when it comes to self-awareness and you think about reflection, I always say reflection doesn't solve your problems. It doesn't solve your problems. Like by you reflecting, you're not going to be like, oh, wow, I'm good. It doesn't solve it. It exposes them, right? Think about it. When you've had reflection times, how many times have you been either journaling or think you're like, oh, wow, like you recognize something that you may have not recognized before? It exposes you so that you can work on it. But that does not mean you have to work on it right there and then. And that's where some people can mess up. They're like, I figured this out, now I gotta go. No, you need to sit in that for at least a couple of minutes or a couple of days because you haven't even processed it yet. You know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah.
There's stuff that comes our way where we're thinking through it, we're like, what do I do? Okay, I'm gonna take action on it. Whoa, hold on. You need to sit in that for a little bit because that you just got that revelation, you just got that insight. You need to let that marinate a little bit so that you can figure out how you take the action. If you even need to take the action right away, because sometimes our action involves two or three or a group of people, and we're not thinking about how they're processing through it, only how we're processing through it. So we have to sit in that a little bit longer. So this is where I love thinking about self-aware action, because it takes it a little step deeper into, okay, how am I processing this? Where am I on the rational side? Where am I on the emotional side? And so this chart breaks it down into being emotionally present or distant versus also being rational and irrational. So two different categories. So I want to explain this real quick. So when I talk about being emotionally present, it's you are aware of how you are feeling. And it's very interesting because the more and more people I meet with, I think more people think they're aware of their feelings when they really aren't. And I usually know when they're not aware because I'm like, well, tell me how they're feeling. And they only have like two feelings. It's like, I'm just mad. I'm like, most people when I talk to them and they only have like mad and sad, I'm like, you're probably not as aware of your feelings and how you're feeling because you're only putting into like these small or these big categories. There's deeper feelings, you're just not aware of it. They're just turning whatever they're feeling in is to anger. But the more I peel back the layers, I'm like, honestly, you're not angry, you're lonely right now. Right? So it's like the more you peel it back, you're able to see that, but a lot of people don't go there. They just translate into anger. So part of it is to know, am I emotionally present first? Can I feel this? Do I know what I'm feeling? Is it clear to me? And then, or am I emotionally distant where I might suppress it? So this might be someone who they're feeling a certain feeling. They're like, I don't want to deal with it. I'm pushing it aside. You still feel it, but you're pushing it aside. Or you could repress it and act like it's not even there. For whatever reason it may be, it's like, I don't have this feeling. So I'm just blocking it out. And that could be through trauma in the past. There's a lot of reasons for it. But for people who are emotionally distant, they suppress or they repress their feelings and their emotions. And that is something really important to know because as we interact with ourselves, but also as we interact with other people, that's happening all the time, right? But there's also like this rational and irrational side. So we can make more logical decisions in how we do things, and we can make more illogical decisions in how we do things. And how are we being more logical in our decision making, or are we being illogical in our decision making, or are we being more logical in our decision making? And understanding that. So you put those two together, you start to see a better picture of yourself, but also even other people in our lives. And this could shift from personal life to work life in different scenarios you might be in. But I start watching people more and more. I'm like, oh, I'm seeing it a little bit more clearly. Like this person doesn't want to deal with their emotions, or this person's making some really irrational decisions. This is not logical at all. They're just going off of their feelings. So I want you to kind of process through this. Let's go here, here, here. And we're going to pause on each one because I want to really drive this home and for you to be able to see not only your life now, but also even think about your past. Because I'm sure in your past, you've seen all of these categories. So let's start with the bottom right.
Reckless,
And this is
emotionally distant, and irrational. So 0 for 2 on this one.
So tell me about that. Like, what has resonated with you in any part of your life about being more reckless?
As a like an example,
You, you don't have to give an example. Let's do overarching theme, like maybe season of life, or just explaining why maybe you might have stepped into a season like that.
I immediately think of just impulsive, right? And I think that makes sense too, because you're not acting either with the right emotion or any emotion and no logic whatsoever. But I think as I've matured, I've gotten better. And we talk a little bit about like emotional intelligence, your limbic system, taking
You said it.
taking in information, taking in sensory data. But I think it's also the older you get, the more data your mind and body has to process through. And I think it helps you make better decisions. But the younger I was, the more reckless I was, for sure. And I do still have situations where I'm reckless, and it's usually an emotional trigger. Like it'll hit a certain trigger, and I'm not aware at all to invoke logic. But it does still happen for sure. I think it's more controllable in terms of like the after effect too. It's how long are you going to stay reckless for? I think the older I've gotten much better at admitting I'm wrong and apologizing too for these situations.
It's good.
I'm not going to keep talking.
Next one.
Unpredictable,
So that is which two categories?
irrational. Oh, sorry. It is emotionally present and irrational. Which to re-say that too, it's aware of your emotions but not rational.
So think about it this way. Think about you feel scared. If you're feeling scared, you're feeling scared. It doesn't matter if it's right or wrong. So the rational part of it is I don't care if this is real or not. Or let's say someone's saying, I'm feeling lonely. It doesn't matter if they have a legion of people around them, they're feeling lonely. So because they're making a rational decision, even though there's a ton of people around them, they're like, I'm distancing myself from everybody. That's irrational. So they're feeling a certain way and they're not using their rational thinking like, man, I'm feeling lonely, but man, I have a family. There's people I can call. They're saying, I'm feeling lonely. So guess what? I'm going to go all to the deep end and distance myself from everybody.
And don't just yes me on this. I know you won't, but like, is that also somewhat to say that you're wrong about the emotion you're feeling?
You know what? I hesitate to say that because if someone is feeling lonely, I have to validate that that's what they're feeling. I don't know what's triggering that, but they're feeling it, you know?
Yeah.
And it could be something, they may have a lot of people around them, but there might be something that they're not feeling, they may not be feeling seen. And so for me to just go at surface level to say, wow, you have everybody around you. What are you talking about? It might mean like, wow, they're not really feeling seen by me, even though I'm around them. I might need to encourage or validate. So I hate dismissing people's emotions. I want to at least say, I acknowledge it. I need to understand a little bit more of what's triggering this. But that doesn't mean that they have to go all the way in the deep end and say, because I'm feeling this, I'm going to make the most irrational decision and I'm going to turn my phone off, go away for a couple months and not talk to anybody. That's why it's so unpredictable. It's like 1 minute they're here and then all of a minute they're feeling an emotion and like, where did they go? Like what happened? It's unpredictable.
For me, it's anger. Like that's the one I think that drives the most irrational behaviors is when I'm angry. And like sometimes it materializes in like, and it is intentional too. It's just a shutdown because I know a lot of times if I act in anger, it's unpredictable but borderline reckless. But that's definitely one of those emotions that I find myself being very unpredictable. I think like positive emotions, and I guess I would actually argue that any awareness of my emotions, I tend to be more rational. But as soon as I have an emotion that's a little bit harder to be aware of, or it's a faster emotion, um, it'll lead to unpredictable actions. Am I on the mark here with some of this stuff?
That's good. Yeah.
Cool. Rigid. So emotionally distant but rational is rigid. Can I just say stubborn? I think that's like where I go with rigid. And again, it's like being somewhat unempathetic too. Like I'm very stubborn when I'm in this emotionally distant but rational. And it's usually insensitive too. Like it's not emotional.
You know, one thing people knock emotions a lot, and it drives me crazy because we somehow make emotions sappy. Emotions is very intelligent part of us. And one thing I think about, like someone who kind of dismisses it, like trying to be distant with their emotions, I see more people who are in that category lead to burnout because they're not aware of how they're actually feeling, what's really going on in them, that they will almost work themselves to death without even knowing it and how their body's responding to it because they're pushing aside how they're feeling. So our emotions are such a powerful piece of us, and we can't just put it as like almost like a I don't know, like we think about emotions like it's crying or it's like it's sappy, it's like almost like this feminine piece of us, right? And so guys struggle with it a little bit more when they think about emotions, but it is such a powerful tool, not just when we're interacting with other people, but also when we're thinking about ourselves. How do we navigate how we're feeling from time to time, and how do we utilize that too to relate to other people?
I like it, man. I like it a lot. I think, and it probably feeds into like the 2 for 2, but I'm thinking of like rigid leaders, rigid bosses. Like they tend to be really cold, right? And you can always tell that there's emotion there, but it's almost like there's so much intent on being rational that they're just binary. It's like yes or no. But there's a human behind that person. I always find it interesting too, like as you get to know people in power, like it's so easy for us to be on the outside to see like a very rational leader versus when you get to know somebody and you realize that they're a great dad or like a great baseball coach. It's always like, whoa. And I think that's also where, to a certain extent, I think the world can make you cold. I think I've seen that a lot too. And it did to some extent happen with me where I think the more emotional you are, the more opportunity there can be for people to take advantage of the fact that you're in touch with your feelings.
It's very true. That is very true. And so there's a balance, and that's why I don't want people to dismiss the rational side as much as I don't want them to dismiss this more emotional side. And, just like last point on just even thinking about the rigid, you talked about bosses, it's like this balance of, let's say you have these numbers to hit, but there's something serious happening with a person. What are you going to choose? Are you going to slow down enough to see how are they doing? Like, let me really press in here.
Knowing you'll beat your numbers next quarter, right? I mean, like that's those like trade-offs is will you, fall on the sword this quarter to help somebody personally, professionally, and double their performance with an emotionally committed person, or are you gonna hit your numbers? And then I can give you specific examples of people that choose one or the other. You wouldn't be surprised which ones last longer.
Yeah.
So then emotionally present and rational is a self-aware action. It makes sense. I'm fascinated right now with this concept of understanding your emotion as it relates to being self-aware and making decisions. And I don't think a lot of people, including myself, like I don't necessarily think about, this information has me feeling X, and therefore the rational decision based on that information is something else. Like I think especially in the business context, I'm very rational, and I don't necessarily think about what emotions I have that allowed me to infer the data a certain way. It's just logic driven. But knowing how you're feeling and why you're feeling that way definitely seems like an important piece of information.
It's good, man. The reason why I wanted to show this is I wanted to show some of the complexity that comes when we are trying to be self-aware every day. It's not just a simple, let's journal, I'm self-aware. No, we experience some really complex things in our lives on a day-to-day basis. Whether it's someone in our life, whether it's in our own life, it could be past trauma. There's so many different dynamics. It could be family dynamics where at any point we can move from start the day, man, I feel so self-aware. By the end of the day, we're like, I'm unpredictable right now, or I'm rigid, or I feel reckless. And what I'm trying to say is the idea isn't for us to say, when we're self-aware, we're there 24/7. The idea is I love when people are saying, I know where I'm at different points in the day. That to me is way more valuable than just saying I'm self-aware. I know where I'm at, and I'm getting clearer and clearer on what I need to do to get closer to being more self-aware when that's happening.
Time of day is a huge one, huge factor. I wasn't thinking about that much as I was walking through that, but maybe that's just like your level of energy too. But I do think different times a day, depending on what you've been dealing with, it's going to put me in different quadrants, for sure.
I love this because the 10 skills we're going through is all self-leadership.
Yeah.
It's how you lead yourself. the stuff no one really sees, this is what we're targeting, especially with this reflection. This is all the stuff that's in your mind. No one sees it, but it impacts your performance and impacts how you lead others. So I don't like skipping through reflection, and I push it as one of the strongest habits. And for years, people were like, dude, stop harping on reflection so much. And I'm like, no, this is it. You have to, this is something I want people to do for the rest of their lives. You have to devote yourself to reflecting and processing your thoughts because it weighs so heavily in your leadership as you're doing more and more things. So
Just real quick too, like
Yeah.
I really regret not intentionally reflecting like during my corporate career. Like I never, it was like your sent emails was like the closest thing. If you had to figure out what you said a certain day, like you search your emails and hopefully you find it. But there was nothing of substance, right? It was just an email. But like I still think back on like how I could have been more optimal and just some of the things that have been working for me now. You're spot on, man. And it's interesting too, to your point, like I am on the surface surprised that reflection is such an important part of this, but it makes perfect sense. Do you also like, do you find too that people that are bad with themselves are good with servant leadership or vice versa? Like I sometimes feel like maybe people are great at one and not at all the other, and that might work in certain situations, but to where we're going, I think having both is probably a superpower.
yes, I would say I see people who enjoy one more than the other. I definitely see that. I see people who have skills in the area, but there's gaps. So usually there's always a leaning. Um, but I would say both is like really the key. And, when I talk to people who are saying like, well, I'm really, really good at the servant leadership side and I feel like I crush it, but I'm not really good at self leadership side. And then I'll just show them, I'm like, I hear you on that. And people may enjoy working for you, but you're going to start to see the gaps as you're thinking about your leadership holistically. And that's what we're trying to avoid to where, yeah, people like working for you, but you don't produce results, right?
And it's crazy to be sitting here at 32 and be like, that makes perfect sense. No one's told me yet, but it really does make perfect sense, man.
Hey man, leadership is wild. There's so much to it and it's so fun. Well, I keep saying it's so fun and people are like, yo, this isn't fun. But I hope to convince people it's so fun because there's just so many areas you can work on, but you don't have to rush it.
And these are like those moments where I hate that we're filming because what is fun is for me to catch myself, pause, and think about being intentional. And I'll still remember the day that like I started actually being really intentional about my situational leadership, which is another somewhat leadership science. But when you see yourself act in a more valuable way, it's fun, man.
Yeah.
I'll validate you. It's
Let's
fun,
go.
man. It really is.
So on a reflection, I want you to read this. This will be the last thing you have to read. You've done great.
As long as it's not where the red fern grows.
But this is just, I'm like, you'll notice what I do is like, I just try to hammer in a point. So I'm hammering this idea of reflection instead of just saying, hey, reflection's important, let's do it. I'm like trying to, reflection. And so this is the last thing around it of like, okay, why do it? How do you reflect? And what are the benefits?
I'm definitely going to cut the video and go to, I can be a little intense.
Because it's almost like we're moving on. Okay, next. And I'm like, reflection.
Nope.
No, reflection. No, reflection. Literally, that's how I'm thinking. I'm like, I got to make sure I like keep hitting this.
You understand your customers though, man. It's so easy to just kind of gloss over things, but why reflect? To process your thoughts and feelings in order to become more self-aware. How to reflect? Unpack your thoughts and feelings and ask yourself why you are thinking, feeling that way until you get to the root of it. Ask yourself what you learned about yourself from unpacking your thoughts and feelings. Wins of reflection. Know what you are thinking, feeling, doing, wanting, and sensing. Know your strengths and weaknesses. more clarity around next steps.
Thoughts around that?
I'm just thinking about, I'll use a very specific example from this morning. This random, it was basically like the welcoming workflow for Bald Republic. And it's really been something I have not given any thought. And we're launching Monday, and it's funny because we've touched on this and I wanted to bring up this example, but when I look at this Winds of Reflection, it was documented. I even did tell myself I will wait till tomorrow because as I started getting into the details of what it entailed, it spiraled, and it became exactly like we were talking about earlier, not a decision I should do on my own, right? Something I should ask for feedback on and develop kind of a straw man and figure out the right way to move forward from a technology perspective, but not necessarily from a copy perspective. Like, what will the welcome email say? How will that actually invoke other processes that already exist within the workflows? Anyways, it's just really interesting around like how something during reflection can come to the surface, and then just giving yourself time to actually figure out how to clarify those thoughts. And there was something too in my journal this morning too about like just trying to get myself to a point where I'm going to be agile and okay as these continue to come up, because it's just going to be a crazy week for me, right? There's no version of this. We talked about planning earlier where I got every single thing that we needed to get and it's all going to be completely seamless and fly through. But I think just reflecting and centering myself around like knowing there'll be things that get dropped and focusing on the really important things like Apple Pay. But there's a lot to it, man. And I think, feelings are funny. I think that's the other thing too. And like, so again, in tech, I'm pretty sure everybody does this, but root cause analysis, like why? And like, it's really hilarious what you get to on the third and fourth and fifth whys. It really is like, you can think you're feeling a certain way, but when you're actually unpacking why you're feeling that way, it's very far from the root until you get deeper. But reflection is what's helping that stuff. And I think that's also where you can then actually address the cause, right?
It's like self-therapy.
Well, I've talked to you about this before. There's another person. It's my alter ego. So it is real therapy with the PhD version of Stephen Voltaggio, who's advising me on my thought process. He's a real smart guy. He can be mean sometimes. I was definitely going to use a profanity there.
Good job. Only one today.
It really is self-therapy. And I will say too, I think and we talked a little bit about like the writing aspect too, but that happens to me when I reflect too, is I can't get everything in my mind out as fast as it comes. And so even just like speaking things into existence, when I type them, it's a whole nother level of permanence.
Gosh, man, I love this. And I love how you're just even thinking about just reflection. You already do it, but what does it look like to add even more layers to it and build upon it even more so it's stronger and you're getting more out of it? And, all of these skills that we're going through, it's interesting. I didn't think about this while I was doing it, but afterwards I'm like, you cannot do these things unless you slow down. You can't rush through any of these skills. You have to pace yourself, really take it in, understand what you're doing, trying things out, stepping back. And that's what's so cool about it. But it's also hard because we want it now.
Yeah.
Give me the skill now. What do I need to do? Got it? Am I done? Yeah. Good. No, it's like, if you want to get to mastery, which maybe not every skill, but there probably are skills you want to get to mastery and skills that you want to be more skilled in, you're going to have to like pump the brakes a little bit and really understand what you're trying to learn and get skilled in.
And I think too, I want to be open about this. I don't think I have a choice, right? Like I know where I want to get to in my life, and I have to become a master of reflection, prioritization. Like those are things, and I see it the older I get. I mean, there's so much. We talk about this every once in a while, but like, I don't even have a kid yet, and I'm having a hard time prioritizing my life. It's a skill that I need to master.
Yeah. It's interesting because especially in the West, people don't necessarily feel like they need it, because they've gotten away without utilizing it. And because of that, that's why burnout is so high, because people just figure it out. And I told you this last time, but it's a question I really always want you to ask yourself as we're going through skills, because there's going to be times where certain habits you're currently doing, you're like, but it's working. And then I'm maybe encouraging another one and asking yourself the question, is there a better way? And will maybe this better way may be a little bit challenging to implement now, but how is it going to change me and impact me 3, 4 years from now? Some of the things that you work on, it's going to have that type of effect. And if you only think about now, when you start really working on a skill, it's going to cause friction. Some of the new habits and the goals you go after, it's going to cause friction. There's going to be frustration. You're not always going to want to do it. And that friction is really good with growth, but you can't just think about the now. You have to constantly think about who you want to be. Because if you think about that, you're like, okay, this sucks right now. I don't love this. I don't know how long this is going to last, maybe 3, 4 months. But gosh, if it helps me get closer to here, and if it takes 3 to 6 months of friction to get closer to this, hell yeah, I'm doing it. You know what I'm saying? There should be no question in our minds about that, but we need to have that self-talk of like, listen, if it's helped me get closer to this, I don't give a care if it's a year of friction. Who cares? Give me that friction to help me get to that.
I think the thing that came to my mind too, more so in like the beginning part of what you're saying, the ends landed right where I needed it to, but I find myself like adding too many habits to healthy routines and then losing the value of the specific habits. Like, so for instance, like duration is something that always tries to impact my journaling, where it's like, can I prompt these questions and write faster, or have a more of substance journal entry that's based on these prompts versus like just enjoying the art of writing and getting deep and intentionally spending 30 minutes writing every day, but then rushing my dog walk. Like it's so fascinating to your point, like the friction materializes itself in so many different forms and fashion. And I think it's making sure I'm prioritizing, ironically, without even knowing it, what things are more important than others. But I also think it gets back to the skill I'm going to work on. I was going to say the thing I'm bad at, the skill I'm working on of prioritizing my day better and making sure that I don't end up in situations where I have to combine things that I should be treating as distinct and enjoying the output of each. Long way to go. But,
All of us do.
yeah.
This leads to the homework.
All right.
So, we talked a little bit about emotions and feelings and all of that. So I wanted to do something that kind of relates to that. And this is something you can just add to your journaling. So Have you seen a motion wheel?
Probably, but
Okay.
yeah.
So I think they're incredible. And so I didn't create this. I just shifted the way it looked because I wanted to give it a little bit more depth to it. And so this is a ton of emotions. And you look at a section if you're like, okay, am I feeling happy? And then there's a lot of different ways that you can process through that. Same thing with trust, fear, surprise, sad, disgust, angry, and then anticipation. So what I really want you to do is I'm giving you this to be able to take into times when you're reflecting, and I want you to have an idea of how you're feeling that day to start the day. And I want you to record it. And I want to hear next time what was the range of your emotions throughout the entire week.
Okay.
I'm also going to give you this. It's going to be a tool. I'm going to give you 365 days of journals that you can put digitally. It has a different question each day. It's a directed prompt for you. Whether you want to utilize this or not, it's totally up to you, but at least gives you something to like, okay, here's something that I can gauge this with. Or if you're getting stuck and you're like, what do I reflect about? There's different questions that it can prompt you with. So I'm sending you that as well.
Do you, so just one emotion?
Yeah, so I want you to, the most dominant emotion at the time. So think about whenever you're doing it, it could be in the morning. It may be relating to something from last night. It could be something from that morning, but just kind of see where your emotions are. And I think it's going to be really interesting for you to just think about a 7-day period of, wow, this is really interesting. And what's cool about this is sometimes these ones won't resonate with you. You're like, I mean, there's times where I'm like, I don't feel any of these. And then I'm like, oh, actually, I am feeling sad.
Yeah.
By the way, when I go down here, I start to see how it's translated into. And I think that's going to help you become more aware of your emotions. The more this becomes like a regular thing for you to know, like, hey, I am feeling nervous. I am feeling stressed. You know, I'm interested in this. I'm feeling eager. I'm upset. I'm mad. Like, to be able to know that, bro, it is so good.
And I'll track like why I'm feeling that way too, so we can talk about it in detail next time.
Yep.
So we'll just do 1 week of this for now.
Just 1 week.
Okay.
Just for you to get an idea. I want to see what it's like for you as you're thinking about your emotions more. Because when you think about it during the day, it really does impact how you go through the rest of your day.
Yeah. The second tier is awesome here, man. Because it is, and I think that's where like I do this today. I have primary, secondary, but it's usually anxious, excited, amazing, like very fluffy. And then I have ones like LR, LR, LRT. Let's rock, let's rock, let's rock today.
Yeah.
So I do things like that too. But it's also more like how I'm feeling, how I want to feel. But I got this, man.
Good stuff, man.